What kind of man would choose a hanging over marriage? And why would a mountain man step in to marry a woman everyone else ignored? The dusty frontier town of Cedar Ridge had never seen a day like this. By noon, the courthouse was packed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with heat, excitement, and the uncomfortable truth that the town was about to witness something cruel disguised as justice. Judge William Peterson sat high on his wooden seat, his face full of pride, as if he were the star of a show. He enjoyed the power he held over everyone, and today he had arranged something he believed would be remembered for years. Joan Taylor would have never come here if she had known her life was about to change. That morning, she woke up in her tiny room above the general store, thinking it would be a normal day. She had planned to spend her afternoon sewing for Mrs. Ross, the town seamstress, earning just enough to pay for rent and one meal a day. She never expected her name to leave anyone's lips. Most days, it felt like she didn't exist at all. Joan was 26, with a soft, round body that drew whispers and judgment everywhere she went. Back in Missouri, she had lived with her father on a small farm. After he passed from sickness, debts swallowed their land, leaving Joan with nothing. No family, no home, no future. She traveled west hoping for a fresh start, but the frontier was unkind to women like her. Women without beauty, women without family connections, women who tried to stay small so people would not stare or laugh. To survive, she worked long hours mending clothes. She walked through town quietly, eyes lowered, hoping no one would notice her. People weren't cruel to her, not directly, but the cold indifference cut deeper. The other women did not include her in conversations. The men never looked her way. She had learned to eat little so her food would last, and to sleep through hunger when it didn't. But behind her quiet looks and soft frame was a heart full of loneliness that she fought to hide. Every night in her room, she wondered what it would feel like to matter to someone, just once. Everything changed when Dennis Williams arrived. A gambler with smooth words and fast lies, he moved into town and soon became friends with Judge Peterson. When Dennis was caught cheating at cards, everyone expected him to be forced out of Cedar Ridge or worse. But the judge had a different plan. A plan that made townspeople rush to the courthouse early that morning. The judge announced that Dennis would not hang for his crimes if he chose an unmarried woman in town to marry before sundown. The marriage would erase his punishment. At first, the crowd laughed and clapped, treating the hearing like entertainment. But fear rippled through the women. If Dennis pointed at you, you had no choice. Young women hid. Families locked daughters in their homes. Married women whispered in the back rows. Joan believed she was safe. Why would anyone choose her? She was invisible. That was the one thing she could count on. She stood at the back of the courtroom, pressed against the wall, watching everything unfold. Judge Peterson dragged the moment out. Enjoying every second of attention, he asked Dennis again and again if he was ready. The gambler soaked it in, scanning the room with a smirk as if shopping for a horse rather than a wife. His eyes settled on Michelle Moore, a sweet young woman sitting near the front. Michelle's face turned pale. Dennis opened his mouth to speak her name. The entire room leaned forward. Then the courtroom doors flew open with a loud bang. A tall, broad man walked in, his boots striking the floor with purpose. The air shifted. People stepped aside without thinking, as though the mountains themselves had entered the room. Roy Rodriguez had arrived. The mountain man rarely came into town. He lived alone high in the hills, buying only the few supplies he needed before returning to his cabin. He had a serious face, a strong build, and eyes that looked right through a person. Joan had seen him once or twice from a distance and always wondered about him. He never laughed with the other men. He never stayed long. He lived quietly, hidden from the world. But today, he walked straight to the front and faced the judge. "I invoke the right of substitution," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I will take his place." No one breathed. No one moved. Even Dennis stared at him with shock. The judge had never expected someone to interrupt his show. You understand what that means? Judge Peterson asked. You choose a bride, or you hang tonight. Roy nodded once. Gasps filled the room. The judge looked thrilled by the unexpected twist. A mountain man choosing a bride? This was even better entertainment. The judge spread his arms wide and grinned. Then choose any unmarried woman in this room. Who will be your wife? Silence. Roy looked at every woman, his eyes calm, thoughtful. Joan watched him, not because she thought he would look at her, but because she was curious to see what kind of woman he would choose. Her heart nearly stopped when his arm lifted. He pointed straight at her. I choose Joan Taylor. The room exploded with shock. Joan could not move. Her body froze, as if her feet had grown roots into the wooden floor. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, wide with shock. Some people whispered her name like it was a mistake or a joke. Others stared at her with pity, as if being chosen by a man was a burden rather than a blessing. Joan's heart pounded so hard that she thought she might faint right there in front of everyone. Judge Peterson stared at Roy, almost amused, then burst into laughter. His loud, cruel voice filled the room and made Joan shrink back. You choose the fat girl? He said, shaking his head in disbelief. Of all the women here, that is who you want? My word, man, you must be desperate to die rather than choose wisely. The words burned into Joan's chest. People laughed along with the judge, and Joan felt each laugh like a stone thrown at her. All her life she had tried to stay invisible to avoid moments like this. Now she was in the center of the room with everyone watching, everyone judging. But Roy did not laugh. He did not look embarrassed or uncertain. He stood solid and confident, his face calm as stone. His eyes stayed on the judge. I made my choice, Roy said. Do your duty as judge. The laughter died almost instantly. Something in Roy's voice made it clear that this was not a game. Judge Peterson coughed, trying to regain control of the room. He waved his hand toward Joan. Come forward then, the judge said, sounding annoyed now. Let's get this done. Joan's legs trembled as she walked down the center aisle. She could hear every whisper around her. Why her? He must have lost his mind. She should be grateful someone wants her at all. When she reached the front, Roy stepped forward and offered her his arm. His hand was steady, his posture strong. Joan hesitated before placing her hand on his arm. The warmth of his skin surprised her. No man had ever held his arm out to her like that before. Not once. The judge rushed through the wedding words, treating it like paperwork rather than a union of two lives. Joan barely understood what was being said. Her head felt full of fog. Only when the judge said the words, "You are now husband and wife," did the world fall silent again. Roy gently turned toward her. He took her hands in his. His hands were rough from work, but his touch was gentle. He lowered his head and gave her a soft kiss, not rushed or forced, but respectful. Joan's breath caught in her chest. It was the first time anyone had ever kissed her. The crowd slowly began to leave the courtroom, still whispering and shaking their heads. The judge, looking bored now that the show was over, stood and walked away without another word. Only Roy and Joan remained standing at the front. We should leave, Roy said quietly. Joan nodded, unable to speak. He did not rush her, but he kept her hand in his as they walked outside. Joan saw Dennis Williams by the exit, being released by the sheriff. He tipped his hat toward her with a smirk before walking away. Joan felt sick knowing a criminal had been saved at her expense, but Roy gave her hand a small squeeze, guiding her forward. They walked through the town in silence. People stared as they passed. Some looked confused, others amused or shocked. But Roy did not let go of her hand. He walked steadily, as if he had nothing to be ashamed of and nothing to hide. Leaving town behind, they began the long walk up into the hills. Joan struggled to keep up with the rough climb, but Roy slowed his steps for her without saying anything. He helped her over rocks and held her steady when the path became steep. Not once did he complain. Not once did he show regret. By the time they reached his cabin, the sun was low. Joan expected a rough shack, but the cabin was stronger and more welcoming than anything she had imagined. It was clean, with handmade furniture and shelves filled with books. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke. "It's beautiful," Joan said softly. Roy nodded. "I built it myself." He showed her the small home, speaking in a calm, even voice. He didn't act like a man who had been forced to marry. He acted like someone who wanted peace. Someone who lived a simple life and meant to share it with her without shame. That first night was quiet. They ate dinner at the small wooden table. Roy let her rest, knowing she had gone through more in one day than most people handled in a lifetime. Over the next weeks, something unexpected happened. Joan slowly began to feel seen. Roy listened when she spoke. He valued her thoughts. He taught her simple tasks around the cabin and asked her to help with others. He never raised his voice. He never looked at her with judgment. He treated her as if she mattered. Little by little, Joan's heart began to open. She laughed again. She slept without tears. She no longer felt invisible. One evening, months later, Joan stood on the cabin porch watching the sunset. Roy was working in the small garden, planting late-season vegetables. He looked up at her, and the smile he gave her was real and warm. She felt something strong grow inside her chest, something she had never felt before. Love. It had come softly, like sunlight after a long winter, and just when life seemed calm and safe, a shadow from their past returned with trouble in his eyes. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The air turned colder near the end of autumn, and Joan felt something shift around the cabin. Roy had been quieter than usual for days, watching the woods as if expecting something. Joan sensed the change, but she didn't ask right away. Life had become peaceful, and she didn't want to disturb the calm they had built. One afternoon, when the sun dipped behind the trees early and the light faded faster than normal, Roy walked inside with a serious look on his face. "Stay close to the cabin," he said. "If you hear anything strange, call for me." His tone told her everything. Something was coming. That evening, while Joan prepared supper, a sound of steady footsteps approached the cabin. Roy stepped out, closing the door gently behind him. Joan moved to the window. When she saw the visitor, her breath caught. Dennis Williams. He looked very different from the man who had smirked in the courthouse. His clothes were dirty, his face tired, and his eyes had the look of someone on the run. Roy stood a few feet away from him, arms crossed. "What do you want?" Roy asked. Dennis let out a shaky breath. "Trouble's coming behind me. I need a place to hide." Roy didn't move. "You made your choice that day. You walked free on another man's price. Why come here?" Quote. Dennis looked past Roy toward the cabin, guilt covering his face. "Because you were the only man who ever did something decent for me. I didn't deserve it, but you did it anyway. I didn't know where else to go." Joan stepped out then, her hands trembling a little. Roy glanced back at her, but did not stop her. She walked beside her husband, standing straight as she faced Dennis. "You cost us everything that day," she said softly. Not angry, just truthful. "You walked away. We lived with the weight." Dennis lowered his head. "I know. I'm not here to cause trouble. I came to warn you. Judge Peterson is twisting the story. He's saying you forced his hand, humiliated him. He's angry, and he wants payback." Roy's jaw tightened. Joan felt worry rise in her chest, but Roy gently placed a steady hand on her back, a quiet reassurance. "What does he plan to do?" Roy asked. "He's coming with a small group of men. He wants to drag you back to town, claim the marriage wasn't legal, and—" Dennis hesitated, then finished. "Hang you." Joan's heart dropped. The life she had only just begun to believe she deserved was now shaking beneath her feet. Roy looked at her, not with fear, but with calm certainty. "We face this together," Roy said. Joanne nodded, feeling strength spread through her. Months ago she would have hidden, believing she wasn't worth fighting for. Now she stood beside a man who chose her without shame, and she would not let fear steal what they had built. That night, Judge Peterson arrived with 3 men. They approached the cabin loudly, certain of their power. Roy stood outside waiting, Joan behind him, her hand resting on his arm. "Well," Judge Peterson said with a smug smile, "looks like the show continues after all." Roy did not raise his voice. "You made your choice that day. I followed the law you spoke. Joan is my wife. I won't let you take her or this life from us." Judge Peterson laughed. "She was a joke choice. You humiliated me. And now I take back control." Joan stepped forward then, surprising everyone. Her voice was steady. "You mocked me when he chose me. You wanted my shame to entertain you. But look at me now. He has given me more respect in these months than you have given anyone in your courtroom in your whole life." Peterson blinked, caught off guard. Joan continued. "You wanted a spectacle, but you made something you didn't plan. You created a marriage built on strength, respect, and love. And now you can't stand that the joke became something beautiful." Roy looked at her with pride, and that gave her courage to finish. "You are not taking this from us." The men behind the judge shifted, uncertain now. They had expected tears, fear, or begging, not a woman standing tall beside the man who chose her. The moment hung in the air, heavy and tense. Then Dennis stepped out of the shadows. "She's right," he said. "You misused the law, Judge. You humiliated an innocent woman. That man took my place with honor. If you drag Roy back, the whole town will hear the truth, from the man you let go." Judge Peterson stiffened. His men hesitated, unsure if they wanted to follow him into a fight that was no longer clear or justified. The judge stared at Roy, then at Joan, and finally at Dennis. Slowly, he backed away, furious but defeated. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the strength was gone from his voice. He turned and left with his men. When they disappeared, Joan let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Roy turned to her, his eyes warm. "You were braver than anyone today," he said. Joan shook her head. "I just spoke the truth." Roy smiled, a soft, loving smile that still made her chest fill with warmth. That's what makes it powerful. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. For the first time in her life, Joan felt fully seen, fully loved, and fully chosen, not by chance, not by accident, but by a man who meant every word he said. As winter's snow began to fall over the mountains, Joan knew one thing with certainty. What started as a forced marriage had turned into the greatest gift life had ever given her. She had been the girl no one noticed, the girl people mocked, the girl judged for her body, not her heart. But Roy had seen her, and now, standing in his arms, Joan knew she would never live in the shadows again.